Hello. Hello to everyone. Hello to all of you who are joining Global Women United for Peace Against NATO for this feedback seminar, which was held in St. Petersburg in September. The name of the conference was, if I can recall it absolutely correctly, for Peace, Nature and Cooperation. Also, there'll be feedback from the Eurasian Women's Forum. Our people have been very busy. Now, Global Women United for Peace Against NATO, which you can find more about us at womenagainstnato.org, which I really invite you to go and see our past events, our videos, our galleries, and our declaration. So we're a group of like-minded women and indeed men, because we don't exclude men exactly. But to be honest, we're living in a man's world, and we women, we really don't want your institutions or your wars, your death machines, your cowardice in the fate of genocide. We women are the bringers of life. We are appalled at the militarization of women. We're appalled at the fake heroism of combat, the obsequiousness of military recruitment in schools. And we don't want NATO. NATO is the harbinger of war and hardship, the proxy army of the US and its ceaseless ambition for world domination. We are Global Women United for Peace against NATO, precisely because NATO is the thief, the wolf in sheep's clothing, the bully in the playground. And for any chance of a non-violent future, it must be abolished. So without further ado, I will move on to our first speaker, Tamara Lawrence. Tamara?
Sorry, Pippa, Oleg is here. It looks like he's just joined us.
Oh, right. Oleg, I can't see you.
You can see him in the participant list, and I think if you were to click allow to talk, he would be visible.
He's coming on the other link. Okay. Yep, we can arrange that. Joe, I expect you can arrange to allow Oleg in so that he can be a speaker on this forum. This is good. Right, we're getting there. So,
do you listen to me?
Oh, I can hear you, Oleg. You could be a little bit louder if you can make that possible. So,
Okay.
Oleg, let me just introduce you whilst you sort that out. We can't see you, unfortunately, but maybe you can change that. So, our first greetings are from Oleg Vodrov. Oleg is an engineer, physicist, and environmentalist. He's chairman of the Public Council of the South Coast of the Gulf of Finland, St. Petersburg, Russia. He was elected as an IPB board member in October 2022. Oleg is one of the leaders of the Russian peace, environmental protection, and nuclear safety movements. In coalition with partners from the Baltic Sea, he is working to reduce the level of confrontation between NATO and Russia in the Baltic. Oleg, it's really, really nice to have you here to kick off this webinar, this feedback webinar. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Do you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay. Dear friends, greeting from the south coast of the Gulf of Finland. I like to see my new friends and so many thousands kilometers between us, but I feel myself so comfortable because after the Saint Petersburg, I feel myself that I'm in the circle of the friends. we are together. And when we discussed in the Saint Petersburg 1 month ago, many of us was Russian people was a foreign agents, but in your countries, many of you have status agent of the Kremlin. But in Saint Petersburg, we formulated a new agenda for the civil society and politicians from the two environmental regions. Thus, today we are agents of the Baltic and agents of the Arctic. And I'd like to congratulate you with this status. This is important event in the current political turbulence in the world. Politicians are trying to divide us, to make us enemies within national political borders. But we created boundaries for the unification, not separation. The famous physicist Albert Einstein once noted that if we have a crisis in the system, then the way out of this crisis cannot be found by those stakeholders who created this crisis. New stakeholders, new ideas, and new models are needed. Those who make decisions about possible military operation in the Baltic and Arctic regions are thousands of kilometers away from us in Washington and in Moscow. They won't ask for our concern to this. But in the event of destroying of nuclear power plants in the Baltic region, we, 90 million citizens of 9 countries, may become victims. Therefore, I believe that we need to continue to develop the ideas set out in the final declaration of the conference in Saint Petersburg. I think that the target group for our work should be, first of all, civil society, first, the new generation of the youth. Yesterday, I discussed with my Russian colleagues from Murmansk region. It is Arctic region of Russia. We discussed how to unite a new generation from the different countries of the Baltic and Arctic regions. It would be wise to organize a joint online exhibition with the title "The Baltic and the Arctic are our common habitat." Such joint exhibition can become a basis for the discussion how we can protect our common habitat. My colleagues from environmental organizations from the Russian Arctic supported this idea of holding such an exhibition. So, if there are partners in the Baltic and Arctic region, we can organize such an exhibition. Dear friends, I wish you successful discussion today. I wish you strength and protect our common planet Earth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Oleg. That was a lovely introduction. Not forgetting, of course, that the environmentalists among us realize that war is the greatest polluter, and
Yes.
the business of nature and peace are totally interlinked. So thank you so much. And as you say, the politicians are trying to divide us, and it is our job to counteract that, because they will lie to get their way. So without further ado, and just to say once again that if you have questions for the question and answer session at the end of the presentations, please put your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and not in the chat, because I won't be able to find them in the chat. So please be specific. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll give you a little bit more about what's going on as we go through the presentations. But next is the lovely Tamara Lawrence, the most active activist I've ever come across. Now, Tamara is, I have your bio here. She's a PhD candidate at Vasily School of International Affairs, which is the Wilfrid Laurier University. She is co-founder of the East Coast Environmental Law Association, fellow at the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and member of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, as well as Global Women United for Peace Against NATO. So, Samara, please go right ahead.
So good afternoon, afternoon, everyone. It's really wonderful to be with you all. And Oleg, thank you so much for your fantastic opening remarks. And also thank you for your leadership on this conference that we participated in Saint Petersburg. And friends, I also want to begin by saying that I know that we all have very heavy hearts with the wars raging in Ukraine and the genocide in Gaza. And this is why, we're coming together to try to build peace, to make connections, and to help end these wars. And working together to abolish NATO is crucial to our efforts. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to bring up on the screen now. So I hope that you can see all of that. So for my presentation, I'm going to tell you about the 2 weeks that I was in Russia from September 16th to October 2nd. I also want to say at the outset that I'm very grateful to the financial and moral support from the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Canada and the United States. Before I left to Russia, I got a banner made here. You can see the message Global Peace and Cooperation in English, Finnish, and Russian. I also brought buttons with the messages, peace in English and Russian and other languages, books and chocolates, and also flyers about our initiative, Global Women United for Peace Against NATO. So I attended as a representative of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, the 4th Eurasian Women's Forum that took place from September 18th to 20th in Saint Petersburg. It was held at the beautiful Torrid Palace that was built 250 years ago. There were about 2,000 women from 126 countries, and I was reminded that when I was there, that these are women from the global majority, and you can see the diversity in the photo of the women that participated. I was so glad that Leah and Ulla from Finland were able to join me at the Eurasian Women's Forum, and this is us at the Great Duma Hall in the opening plenary. It was really a fantastic event. So there were 100 sessions over the 3 days, and on the first evening, there was this spectacular concert that was held at the Mariinsky Theater, and there was also this incredible gala that took place on the second night at the Peter and Paul Fortress. It was extremely well organized, incredible attention to detail, really showing a lot of care to the women that participated. And you can see in this picture, this was at a session on geopolitics and diplomacy, the diversity of women there. The women in the hijab in the front, Ms. Haji Adam, ran for president of Somalia. And, she, talked about the need for women to come together for peace. There was also, I was sitting next to a Russian indigenous woman from Siberia, a woman from Serbia, and a woman from the Philippines. As part of this Eurasian Women's Forum, there were also sessions on BRICS. And these were really incredible events, very informative to find out more about the agenda for the Russian government that is chairing BRICS this year. And the BRICS summit is going to be taking in place in Kazan very soon. So we were able to learn more about what will take place at the summit, what the priorities were. But having this BRICS meeting at the Eurasian Women's Forum, this was an attempt to amplify the priorities of women in BRICS. So talking about women's empowerment and entrepreneurship in BRICS, trying to build a partnership among all BRICS countries for greater economic development, trying to lift people out of poverty, achieve gender equality. And also they talked about action on climate change. So at the podium, you can see there was a representative of the South African delegate. And I wanted to mention that when we got into that room, on the seat of every chair was this beautiful box, and inside was this lovely brick scarf. And this is what I'm wearing around my neck right now. Another session that I attended at the forum was this panel on greening the economy. And I was surprised and also, saddened to hear the remarks from a Serbian medical doctor who was talking about the long-term health and environmental impacts of the NATO bombing of her country 25 years ago. So you can see on the slide there that she shows that in the 78 days in 1999 that NATO, including my country, Canada, bombed Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, 20,000 bombs were dropped. And in a 1-year period in Afghanistan, NATO dropped 6,500 bombs, and bombs dropping in Libya and Iraq and Syria. And it's this kind of violence, from the NATO countries, which is what women are opposing and why they're coming together in a forum like this for peace and cooperation. But it's really an important reminder for us about, what NATO did to Yugoslavia 25 years ago. Another session that I attended and that I participated in was the Roundtable on Arctic Cooperation. So on the panel with me was Nina, who is a Russian indigenous woman, and Christina, who was a representative of the Russian Coast Guard. And then Anastasia was talking about the work that Russians are doing to clean up the Arctic and how this is an example for other countries. Countries, for instance, from Africa have come to participate in this cleaning up of the Arctic so that they can learn, the programs that are being done and then do it in their own countries. And what I spoke about on this panel was the need for Canada to work collaboratively with Russia, because Russia is our Arctic neighbor, and protecting the Arctic is crucial to our survival and action on climate change. I was really impressed that there was a very prominent prominent participation of Indigenous women at the forum. I learned when I was there that there were 40 Indigenous ethnic groups in Russia, and you can see in the closing ceremony that the traditional costumes that they're wearing, and it was really great to make connections and build relationships. After the Eurasian Women's Forum, I attended this fantastic conference that was really led by Oleg, Ula, and Leah, and I will let them talk more about it. It was a great 2-day event that was held to mark International Peace Day, September 21 and 2022. And I spoke about the fact that NATO and NORAD are militarizing the Arctic. Canada is partnering with the United States to massively militarize the region. We are doing what we can to oppose this in Canada. And then I talked about our desire, our women's peace groups and the Indigenous peoples call for the Arctic to be a zone of peace. And then just before the Finnish women left the conference and returned back to their country, we stood on the streets in Saint Petersburg with our sign, Abolish NATO. Then I'll tell you a little bit more about my time in Russia very quickly. I also had a meeting with a professor from Saint Petersburg State University. We talked about Arctic cooperation. He's in Arctic and academic cooperation He is part of the International Council of Canadian Studies, and he's done lots of research on Canada. And this conflict in Ukraine is severing all of these academic ties, and it's very sad for so many academics. And he's done a lot of research on Quebec and the issue of federalism, how Canada deals with that. And I brought a book for him about Arctic security in French, because they can't also get books from the West into the country very easily. So he was very pleased about that, but I was very glad to make a new connection. I didn't get very much time to do sightseeing in St. Petersburg, but I'll just show you this lovely photo of one of the most impressive cathedrals in St. Petersburg, the Smolny Cathedral and Monastery that was very close to the Forum. And it just represents the beautiful architecture and also the Orthodox Russian tradition and religion that is so prominent as well in the country. And it was very interesting for me to learn about this. So after my time in St. Petersburg, I was there for a week. Then I headed to Moscow. And when I was on the high-speed train in the morning, I read Russia's foreign policy statement. And there are two things in this picture that Canada does not have, and that is we do not have a foreign policy statement. Canadians have been denied an opportunity to craft a foreign policy. We haven't had an opportunity in 20 years. That's because NATO and the United States dictate our foreign policy. The other thing Canada doesn't have that Russia has is high-speed rail. And I want to just read this quote from the Russian foreign policy statement. Humanity is currently going through revolutionary changes. The formation of a more equitable multipolar order is underway. The imbalanced model of world development, which has for centuries ensured the advanced economic growth of the colonial powers through the appropriation of resources of dependent territories and states in Asia, Africa, and the Occident, is irrevocably fading into the past. And this is something that I heard loud and clear at the conferences that I attended in St. Petersburg. And then in Moscow, I spoke at Migimo University, Moscow State Institute of International Relations, and I brought them copies of books. One of the books that I brought for them is this new one that was published last year by two American academics entitled Dying by the Sword, The Militarization of U.S. Foreign Policy. And it's a very eye-opening current book. And I talked to the students about academic cooperation, people-to-people diplomacy, how important that is. I also had a chance to meet with representatives of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. These are medical doctors. I met them 2 years ago, and it was great to meet them again for dinner. And they are opposed, like we are, to all nuclear weapons. They're opposed to Russian nuclear weapons, NATO nuclear weapons, and they want peace and cooperation. And they are hoping that they can get visas to come to New York to observe as civil society representatives the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, something that Canada isn't joining because of our membership in NATO. I also went to the Institute for U.S. and Canadian Studies that was established about 50 years ago, talked about ways that we can build academic cooperation and research. And there are journals that you can publish in, and they have conferences also by Zoom and meetings that you can attend online. And I'm hoping to participate in one next month. The other thing that I did when I was in Moscow is I went to the Sokol district, and I went to a park and I looked for the new statue that was established for Fidel Castro, and it was unveiled by President Putin and by the Cuban President Bermudez 2 years ago. And it really shows, the close relationship between Russia and Cuba, over 60 years, and also the common struggle for liberation and opposition to Western domination. And I was also reminded at the Eurasian Women's Forum that so many countries in the global majority are under US and Western sanctions, and Russia and of course Cuba have been under sanctions for a long time. The other thing that I did when I was there is I reached out to the Canadian Embassy and I asked for a meeting. I said, you know, I just attended the Eurasian Women's Forum and I want to tell you about it and give you a briefing. So I got inside the embassy. I was shocked to discover that Canada's embassy has moved across Moscow and now it is right into the British embassy. And this shows that Canada and the UK have a common position on policy towards Russia, and this is very troubling to me. But I had a meeting. I expressed that we want Canada to work for a diplomatic solution to end the war in Ukraine, stop sending weapons, and to build peace in Russia. And I presented him with a book that just came out from a retired British diplomat who served in that building named Ian Proud. And he came out with this really important book called A Misfit in Moscow, How British Diplomacy in Russia Failed from 2014 and 2019. And it actually represents how Canadian foreign policy has also failed towards Russia. And then just a couple more slides to tell you about, and this is, I walked past the US Embassy in Moscow, and I was surprised to see this billboard that the Russian government had put in front of the US Embassy, and that was just at the beginning of September for the International Day of Journalist Solidarity, and it's a picture of Gonzalo Liro. He was an American Chilean journalist in Ukraine who was detained and he died in prison. And I also noticed a protester who was opposed to US foreign policy standing with a sign. And this protester is part of a group who in the Red Square in Moscow was passing out these leaflets with this image on it. And I want you to see this image. The words are a battle for sovereignty, and what it shows, and this is really, you know, the Russian perspective of NATO. And I think it's really important for us to understand that, have strategic empathy, and to understand what this looks like for the Russians. You know, they're seeing all NATO bases moving closer to the border. And then the other flag there are the bioweapons labs in Ukraine. And now we know from the spring and from the New York Times that there were CIA spy bases as well in Ukraine. So the Russians, you know, asked me in my meetings to them, why is NATO expanding? Why is NATO having this hostility towards Russia? You know, why can't we end this war in Ukraine and build peace? And then finally, friends, I've been telling everybody about this, but I think this is so important. If you haven't read these books, please read Stephen Cohen's very important book, War with Russia, ? And Jacques Baude's book, Operation Z. And then if you haven't already, please go to Russia and build peace. So thank you so much, friends, for this opportunity. And I look forward to the rest of our presentations.
Gosh, thank you, Samara. That was really beautiful. Thank you so much for that update. There was so much information in there. I'm sure many of us will want to actually listen to that again. And this recording will be sent out to all who have registered about a day later. So you will all have the chance to see it again if you'd like to. I'm very impressed with the work that's being done. I mean, the cleaning up the Arctic. I really would love to know more about that. And obviously, the sadness of the breakage of links with academia. This happened with the UK and Brits, and the links with European academia started to be broken as funding was withheld for many of the programs that were there. There was a huge fight about that. But breaking up the academics is clearly part of a strategy to keep us imprisoned in our own silos, if you like. Well, without further ado, I think we'll move on to our next speaker, Olga Mandrika, who is speaking to us from Russia. She is a Saint Petersburg State University graduate at the Department of Biology with specialization in water ecology. She has a PhD in water ecology. For years, she has been dealing with the nuclear pollution problems and all the accumulated environmental damage in the Arctic and in the Baltic regions. She's a university educator, and today she is working in environmental protection, polar protected areas, Arctic resources, and social ecology. So, Olga, this sounds like a very fascinating workload you've got there. I'm delighted that you can speak to us today. Please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I am so glad to participate. I will not repeat those kind words said about our cooperation, and it is my second participation in your organization. Of course, I am not as famous as Oleg Batrov is in his struggle for environment against nuclear danger, but I trying to do my best, and I rely mostly on my students. So the time is limited, and I'm happy to be one of the first speakers because I would rather raise questions than make statements, and I hope they will be useful in our discussion. So, my ideas. After the conference in September, I am so anxious about the Baltic Sea, about the absence of information, and about Helcom, who is working without us, without Russian participants. When I came to our Institute of Press in St. Petersburg, I had a great hope to know fresh news about non-governmental Baltic organization. But nobody answered my question, and I'm still very anxious about the absence of the materials, about their contacts. And so it is my first concern to make bridges with Baltic organization. And another statement, the second statement is, what can we do together and what can I do myself? And so I have maybe very strange advice to the audience how to make bridges. A year ago, a student of mine was doing master's dissertation in the field of economy and ecology, and legislation. And when we analyzed all materials, all fresh news, we realized that all indigenous organizations are prohibited in Russia, that Sams cannot participate, Inuit cannot participate, and so on. But it was a very interesting small discovery. It is possible to join some movements which we are interested in, maybe indirectly. And it was a good example with the Inuit from Chukotka. Basically, Inuit Circumpolar Council is not popular in Russia, and it is impossible to protect any areas, to protect their lifestyle. But they were very wise, and they used their membership in IMO, International Maritime Organization. So, if the Inuits are members of IMO, they started acting through this organization, and they succeeded. They were able to announce one big area of the Bering Sea, which they are interested to protect for fishing, to protect for their lifestyle. And is my idea maybe how we can work and do something like that. The third question is what is happening in Greenland now? Because not long ago they succeeded, they elected a young progressive prime minister who refused to work for the United States and promoted traditional lifestyle. But for the years, different military bases of the United States, they existed in Greenland, and they had transcontinental missiles, and they were preparing for the Third World War. And Greenland government, maybe through the Denmark, they were persuaded in necessity to have these weapons to protect them from the Soviet Union. And my third question, my third statement is what is happening in Greenland? And maybe we can use them as a partner in our peaceful work. And then the last, my statement is about militarization of the Arctic. We all know that actions come from both sides, and who is stronger, NATO or Russia, it is hard to judge, not having a real document. But in my opinion, NATO is more dangerous than Russian Federation with their efforts, because militarization, new military bases in the Arctic, in the Russian Arctic, they are situated in desert areas like Северная Земля, Новая Земля, and different islands. Unfortunately, nobody lives there. And for indigenous people, it is not as dangerous as for indigenous people of Canada and maybe Greenland. I don't know what is happening now. So I gave some materials to my students when they create their new master's works, and they are thinking about the role of NATO, about the negative actions. Unfortunately, I cannot give materials about Russia. I only take materials from the time of the Cold War. And this is my ideas, my statements for discussion, and I think my colleagues, people of goodwill who have gathered there, will help me answer maybe part of them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olga. It's very interesting. And yes, we must ask ourselves more about Greenland, because you've given me information I didn't already have, and we must reach out to like-minded people in Greenland and maybe strengthen our networks there, as well as Donald Trump didn't buy it for a golf course or whatever his plan was 4 years ago. Building bridges is the most important thing I think we can do. And I think conceptually, with everything we're working for, the more bridges we can build, the better. So thank you so much for that, Olga. Very, very welcome. Just before we go to our next speaker, I'll just explain again that we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentations. And after that, if everyone is agreed and would like to stick around, we will stop recording, and Tamara will chair a kind of off-the-record discussion where we can network more fully with each other. Right. Okay, well, next up is Isabel Cassel. Isabel is speaking to us from Germany. She studied art, history, archaeology, city planning, and she has a master's degree in city planning, I believe. She's been a freelance journalist, a researcher in international crisis areas such as the Middle East, the Balkan states, and South America. She's a freelance consultant for peace and international politics and founder of her own organization, Peace Lab Europe. And we put a link in at the top of the chat, but I think perhaps Isabel can put a link in, another link in, since people have joined us. She was spokesperson for Die Linke on peace and international politics, but has subsequently left the party. Currently, she's a board member of the German Peace Council and a member of the Eurasian Society. So, Isabel, without any more pause, let us listen and hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. I hope you can understand me well. Yeah, I was very sad I couldn't come to Russia for the conference, but I was in Russia 2 times before, and I think it was a wonderful initiative. And I hope there will be more such initiatives visiting each other. So at the conference, I talked about that we must address the issue of peace and security not just as a military issue, but as something that is already developing in people's minds. I do not want to repeat all of the aspects since my contribution is published, but I now would like to talk about one point that was broadly discussed at the conference: the ever-increasing restriction and curtailment of freedom of expression, freedom of the press, science, art, and therefore democracy. Germany, especially, urgently needs to put its own house in order before criticizing other countries. Since Germany was made a party of the proxy war in Ukraine against the will of the population, the government now is trying to achieve a war readiness through propaganda. Through a reactionary, authoritarian, and militaristic restructuring of the state, elements of fascism are dangerously re-emerging. So I'm really worried because the promise of never again war, never again fascism is crumbling at all ends, and this development must be stopped immediately. Under the newly introduced category of delegitimization of the state relevant to the protection of the Constitution, for example, it has 1,600 people under observation by the Secret Service. A further tightening of the law is now planned. Public statements that a political or state functionary feels or could only feel psychologically burdened they are to be punished with up to 5 years under the new category of endangering the common good. Political expressions of displeasure on social networks, in city council or municipal meetings, or at public protests could soon become a ticket to prison. By banning and defaming critical voices from public discourse, universities and the arts, we are falling even further behind the standards that applied in the monarchy during the First World War. This also shows that we are on the decline in terms of civilization because we are abandoning what once made Europe strong, a critical public sphere. Today, by contrast, universities are no longer spaces for intellectuals and scientists who want to be innovative, criticize society, or think about their own time. The adoption of the Anglo-Saxon science concept prevents the question of the big picture, as it in the tradition of Hegel, for example, but instead picks out small fields and goes through them down to the smallest detail so that no connections can be made. For a long time, I have criticized the media for no longer reporting comprehensively and objectively, especially by omitting important aspects. But now it has reached the points where lies are actually being spread. The extent of distortions, fake news, untruths, and extreme one-sidedness in connection with Israel's war against the Palestinians, as well as in connection with the proxy war in Ukraine and an alleged threat to Europe from Russia, has reached such a sordid level that counter-information is a very important task. Thus, my initiative, Peace Lab Europe, is a small beginning of this. the West is not the same as Europe. The West always has a border in the East and thinks in terms of friend and enemy distinctions instead of the idea we had in Europe, to organize power in a balance of power. International law has institutionalized the basis of the balance of power on the basis of non-interference. The idea of Europe was that of freedom and democracy, that a society could steer itself, counteract undesirable developments, and initiate a reversal. But at present, we are obviously in a society in which this no longer works because it only goes in a fatal direction, no matter how big the protest. The will of the majority of the population is ignored and only particular interests are promoted. Top positions in politics and the media are almost exclusively occupied by transatlanticists. The Greens in Germany have changed to olive green warmongers and undergone a complete change of personnel. Instead of sober political analysis, they are guided by a perceived moral superiority that is almost religious and therefore irrational and deaf to other arguments. Climate activists are blind in the eye of arms policy. They do not know what war means and have not developed a corresponding awareness of the problem. The position of the Social Democratic Party is also extremely disappointing. All concepts of détente policy are rejected, and they only think about war. The people in Ukraine do not need more weapons, of course, or crazy so-called victory plans that blatantly call for NATO to go to war, but they need a ceasefire and peace negotiations. We also need peace in the Middle East, where there is now the threat of a second Gaza in Lebanon, and even UN soldiers are being attacked by Netanyahu's troops. Russia and the 150 states in which 90% of the world's population live and which are not participating in the Western sanctions against Russia want a different world order. So far, that's true. They, just like the majority of the European population, want a peaceful transition to a new multipolar world order instead of continuing to see US hegemony enforced by force according to the law of the jungle. The scaremongering that Russia wants to attack NATO and is preparing to do so is pure propaganda and a malicious attempt to frighten the population. In this way, the transfer of our taxpayers' money from social systems, infrastructure, education, and healthcare to the coffers of the arms industry can be further justified and promoted. But we say no. We are not falling for it, because we know full well that NATO's arms spending is 10 times higher than Russia's, that the USA has up to 900 foreign military bases, and that it's doing everything it can to prevent its inevitable decline as a hegemonic power. This is why Boris Johnson, on behalf of the US government, torpedoed the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in April 2022, which were about to be concluded so that Ukraine could continue to be misused as a deployment zone to ruin Russia. Now, shortly before the US election with an uncertain outcome, the burden of leading a dangerous, unnecessary, and fatal proxy war is to be placed on the EU and Germany in particular. To this end, the established parties, which have turned their backs on enlightenment, and now also intelligence services as their stooges, are spreading crude conspiracy narratives about Russia and fomenting a dangerous belliosity. According to a recent survey, 80% of the youth in Germany are now afraid of war and being forced to fight in one. We need a return to humanist achievements, education that encourages people to think critically, open debates, a society that is enlightened again. We need a Europe that defends its own interests and as a non-aligned player with a civil character contributes to peaceful conflict resolution as a decisive mediator. Russia is part of this, our European continent, and only together with Russia can European integration and the peaceful transition to a new multipolar world order of sovereign, self-determined states succeed. Zelensky seems to have lost it completely now. His so-called victory plan is actually a doomsday plan. I hope someone tells him and his war-drunk fan base that nuclear blackmail and the threat of nuclear weapons is punishable by law. Even Biden, when he visited here yesterday, has now understood that more weapons only bring more war, its expansion, and no peace. He doesn't want to go down in history as being responsible for World War III, but Germany should do it again if politicians like Merz, Kiesewetter, Röttgen, Pistorius, Strack-Zimmermann, Baerbock, and so on have their way. The majority of the population in Europe and Ukraine want peace instead of NATO. Peace can only be achieved through negotiations in which the security interests of all sides must be taken into account. A neutral Ukraine is really not a catastrophe and is not tantamount to capitulation. Without NATO's eastward expansion, there would be no proxy war in Ukraine. So land for NATO is a good idea if it means NATO finally dissolves in favor of a new system of collective security and Russia withdraws from all Ukrainian territories. We as the German Peace Council will work for negotiations and international understanding in this.
Thank you, Isabel. That was fascinating. It's good that you also drew up the position of the corporate media and their part in propagandizing for more and more war. It's shocking, absolutely shocking. The media lies. I think we're all worried about the curtailment of freedom of speech, all our freedoms, as you highlighted, in every country, in Britain, in the United States, Germany, and probably many other countries that I'm not aware of. We're facing huge crackdowns, whether it's speaking about peace and war, genocide, or even environmental catastrophe that's coming down the road, which has probably already happened. We're just seeing the symptoms of it now. So I think your presentation was really, really useful. And of course, you brought up the fact that the Greens got elected on a peace ticket and immediately moved onto a war footing, Annalena Baerbock being the chief spokesman for that particular position. But Zelensky was also elected on a peace ticket and immediately moved towards war. I think this is a pattern throughout the years from World War I, where was it Woodrow Wilson in America who was elected on staying out of the World War I and within weeks was taking part in it. So politics is not our friend. Moving on now to Ulla Lotzer, who is the most amazing dynamo, highly motivating activist. I believe, Ulla, you've been in politics for many years and discovered the rot that we all face. And you are you've turned to activism as a way of changing the course of the Finnish trajectory. So looking forward to your feedback. Thank you, Ulla. Don't forget to unmute.
Yes, I tried to be very short because we are short of time, but I want to sign everything that Isabel said, and it doesn't only go for Germany, it's the whole Europe. It's really terrible, and what is really terrifying is that the Nordic countries were some kind of a good example for a long time what comes to democracy, freedom of speech, and so on, and we live in real darkness now. So we have to reach out hands. And when I listen to you all, I see that we have an enormous task ahead, and we might not even be able to do it. But we have to do something and take our share. But first of all, I want to thank all the ones who supported the conference in Saint Petersburg financially, because without the financial help, we could never have done it. And WILPF Norway was really a great help. Susanne Urban did a very good job. And Margret Bonin in Germany IPB, International Peace Bureau, contributed, and also friends in the US contributing also through Tamara. So thanks to them, it was able to have this conference. And secondly, a very warm thanks to Oleg, who did all the work in St. Petersburg and put together the program, which was changed several times because of all kinds of unfortunate happenings. And to all the knowledgeable speakers, many of them jumping in the last minute, and as well as all the participants online. Now we have new contacts to work with, and we have to use the networks. The statement which we made will be ready for send out next week. And we have reached over 100 signatories from Russia, the Nordic countries, Canada, US, UK, Germany, Italy, Belgium, Ireland, the Netherlands, Hungary, Brazil. So we are not worldwide, but we have really a broad spectrum. And finally, greetings from Susanne Urban from Wilpf, Norway, who also made a great job with the statement, as also Isabel and Tamara and all the others. She could unfortunately not join us today, but some kind of positive glimpses I want to give you. She had a meeting with a contra-admiral from the Norwegian Marine last Wednesday, and she presented the idea of a large-scale cleanup of the Baltic Sea, as we have mentioned in our statement. And he was very positive, according to Susanne, and he gave Susanne lots of input to work out more details and how to anchor the project also politically. And she will be back with details further on, so we can see what we can do. But one of the advices he gave, the Contra-Admiral, was to get the support also from the Arctic Council, that it would be really an Arctic-Baltic Nordic project. And the keyword he said was building competence and training on total defense, which means also the environment, implying the necessary collaboration between military and the civil realm. And they also talked about different examples of that there is some kind of Russian and Norwegian collaborating, even if top politics close the doors. The top politics tried to prevent it, but still there is some work going on a lower level, and this is what we should somehow try to put forward. So lots of work ahead, and I want also to mention the BRICS Women's Forum, which Tamara took up. We have to remember that in the statement from the Eurasian Women's Forum, they say that the BRICS women support Beijing 95, that is the UN Fourth World Conference on Women. So we have something to work with there. And they also support Agenda 2030. I see that Leah now is there, but we have very, very short time, so I take the notes you gave me. And today I got an email from Germany that some groups in, I think it is in northern Germany, is planning a conference for the Baltic Sea, a Sea of Peace for 2025. And that is where we should all join in. And I wrote an email that now we have to forget about some, maybe some, how should I say, negative things we think of certain movements and so on, and just join hands in order to try to push this Baltic Sea, a Sea of Peace. We have done it before with other movements, not with these movements in Germany. And I want to remind you about the photo display 2 from Global Women for Peace United Against NATO. We had the first one with 200 photos from women all over the world. At the meeting, the Eurasian Women's Forum, the big forum, we met with Leah, wonderful women from all over the world, and also Tamara, of course. We had the Inuit women who promised that they would send photos. So this will be the project we continue when we get the statement out. And Yeah, I think Oleg's idea at the beginning of this to have an exhibition online, it's a little bit like the photo display. It could be really a good idea to show photos from our area, the beautiful environments which we have to save, and also the ugliness which has been happening in these areas. Show both sides. Yes, I think that's all for me. We have a lot of work ahead, and I hope we all can join in and do our best. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ulla. Thank you very much. I like the idea of the Baltic as a sea of peace, and I think that's something really the whole world should get behind, because, you know, we're destroying everything. The extraction economy of the Western nations just doesn't care, and we do, and lots of people do. So we have to find these people, and we have to join hands and build our bridges, in order to be effective in what we do. So thank you. Well, thank you to all our speakers. Now we have some questions in the Q&A session. And the first one is really interesting. And please jump in, speakers, if you'd like to answer it. Don't wait to be prodded. The first question: how do we expose and denounce the current NATO? The 2-week military exercise, Steadfast Noon. In the media, in the UK, there is so little written about it. So what this is talking about is the current NATO military exercise, usually known as war games, which really we want no part of that. But I hadn't heard of Steadfast Noon, and therefore we really do need to probably spread the word about this and what it means and the implications of these kind of war games, often in the backyard of another country such as China, where they just a few miles away start flexing their muscles. It is real bully in the playground stuff. So please, speakers, do jump in if you would like to talk about that.
Can I say something? Oh, Ulla, go ahead. And then I'll speak after you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the Steadfast Noon is covering parts of the Nordic countries and the UK, and is at the doorstep of Russia, of course. And that's, of course, what they want to do. And for the first time, Finland is taking part in a military exercise on nuclear weapons. So it's a huge step backwards for peace in the Nordic countries. I'm not sure if Sweden stayed out. I must say, I can't talk for Sweden now, but I think they were reluctant. I hope they stayed out. So all these massive military exercises, that's of course something we have to have on our agenda. And I think that we could, I was thinking of the photo campaign. The first one, we read the declaration, Nancy Pride read the wording of the declaration when the photos are running. And we have to think about what we could do, what we could read for the second one. And maybe we should take all NATO's war crimes. We should list them all and read them as a background for the photos, so that we can get all the war crimes out. But that's just an idea which we have to still talk about, but that's an idea.
I think that's a great idea.
If I can add to what Ulla said about Steadfast Noon. So this is, an annual a nuclear weapons exercise that NATO hosts, and it started on Monday. It's a 2-week exercise, and it involves 60 warplanes. So the bombers, the fighter jets, the F-35s, the F-16s, and armed drones. And they're flying all day long. Like, they're escalating the nuclear tension that's already there with Russia, and they're exacerbating the climate crisis. You know, all of these emissions that are, and air pollution, it's causing air pollution. They're flying over the two host countries this year are Belgium and Netherlands, but they're flying all over Central and Eastern Europe. And, you know, this just exacerbates the tension and harms the climate and environment and human health. This is just so crazy. And then on top of all of that, NATO engages in air policing every day, and that's upwards of 80 planes that are flying up and down Russia's border. I don't think that Canada is involved in Steadfast Noon this year, but you know, we are part of NATO's nuclear group. And just a reminder to everyone, you know, the reason why our countries that are members of NATO are not joining the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is because of our membership in this US-led nuclear armed alliance. And, you know, this is the vicious circle. But I just, you know, Russia said that it was so irresponsible and reckless to be conducting this nuclear weapons exercise, you know, at a time like this. So we're just ratcheting up, you know, the problem instead of trying to find a solution and trying to end the wars.
Maybe I can also add a glimpse of a positive aspect, because actually Germany is involved in this exercise again, which is terrible. And we had a demonstration at the base of Nürnberg. Well, usually the atomic weapons are staged at Büchel, but this is being renovated. So now they are in Nürnberg, which is involved in this steadfast maneuver now. But I think the glimpse of hope is the Nobel Peace Prize this year, which was given to the Japanese Confederation of A&H bombs victims, Nihon Hidankyo. And we put this together in a press release because it kind of was in the very approximate, one was on Friday and the exercise started on Monday. So we put both together as the opposites. So the Nobel Peace Prize was a big sign for the abolition of all these weapons of mass destruction, the atomic weapons. And then our governments on the contrary, they would not draw the right conclusion, but they would start this maneuver. So we could put those aspects together, and we also have to work a lot more, I think, on the Treaty of Atomic Weapons Prohibition.
Right. Well, the second is not so much a question, but I'll read it out anyway. The perspective on Russia and the history on NATO is very interesting. Most of the conversations have been about the atrocities that Russia have committed only. I appreciate this information. Now, the question that really sort of follows that is, where do we get our information from? We all know mainstream media lies. So perhaps we could have a little run round to see where we tend to get our information from. Ulla has her hand up.
It was actually about the nuclear weapons, but I can maybe comment this too. Yeah, because I wanted to ask Isabel, there is the Munich Security Conference in February, and could we do something about nuclear weapons there? Could we have a one-day meeting and then join the demonstrations which usually take place? And could we try to collect signatures for against nuclear weapons and hand it over there or something? Could we discuss that idea, and could you discuss it with your German friends? Because if we come from Wuhan, we need real cheap localities to meet because we have no money. So if there could be some I don't know, organization that has some kind of but to the media, yes, I don't even open the television news anymore. I don't read any mainstream media newspaper in Finland, because then I start burning my house. So what I get is from you, from all the networks I get newsletters from all kinds of groups, and that's my news. They are in my computer, but not in the mainstream media. That is why we have all the wrong pictures. If you ask the Finnish people why there is a war in Ukraine, they say because Russia wants it. They don't go back to 2014 to see what happened with the coup, Maidan, and the Minsk agreements, which Merkel said it was just a joke. They never wanted them to come true. So this is the facts that common people on the street do not have. And that is very, very, very sad.
Isabel.
Yes. Oh, yeah. First, to answer your question, normally there's always a counter summit in February from the Munich Peace Movement. They do a conference and a demonstration. So of course we could arrange that you are invited at the conference as a group of speakers, and everything else could be arranged then. And for the media, yes, like I said already, I kind of choose it as one of my tasks to do some counter information. We in Germany, we have, well, in the bad situation, kind of some luck. We have this new party, Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht now, which they come from the former Linke, which I was a member of, so I know the members of parliament there. And they put out very good work and statements we can use, also with the questions for the Bundestag. The German government has to answer if they pose questions. So once there was the official questions, if the German government really sees Russia as wanting to attack NATO or is posing a threat, and they had to say no, there are no signs for this. But this is one mechanism you can use. And then, of course, we have the networks of all the peace organizations, and we kind of try to redistribute the informations we get, and we get from people who are really in the field, kind of collecting things. And I'm trying to put it together on my sites, and also in mailing lists, for example.
Right. Tamara.
So in terms of other media resources, I like the independent channels. So I like to follow the Gray Zone and the Duran and that kind of thing. Even I've also followed a little bit of Democracy Now!, of course. But I think I really enjoy reading people who've studied the conflicts and studied these countries really well. So like people like Richard Sakwa at the University of Exeter, who wrote Borderlands about Ukraine, and Stephen F. Cohen, the preeminent expert on U.S.-Russia relations, who died in 2020, and the last book that he published was War with Russia. And then I also feel very strongly about going to places and seeing for yourself what it's like. I realized before I went to Russia for the first time in November of 2022 that I had been propagandized against Russia my entire life. All of the assumptions that I had about the country were completely dispelled when I got there, and I saw what it's like. It's just incredible. And then the other thing is, in Canada, there's never anything positive said about, even before 2022, about Russia or China, never mentioning the fact that millions of people were pulled out of poverty, in those countries. High-speed rail, modernization, all of these things, we could be learning from these countries. So I think going and traveling yourself is so important. Listening to people who are experts in triangulating the information, going to independent media is so important. And then if I can also add, Ulla was talking about doing something around the Munich Security Forum. I wanted to let you all know that NATO is going to be having its parliamentary assembly. So these are elected officials in the NATO countries who are very supportive of NATO. They are going to be meeting in Montreal, Quebec, in November from the 22nd to the 24th, and we are planning a big People's Assembly to challenge the NATO Assembly, and we are also doing a march. And I just have finished a parliamentary petition to the Canadian House of Commons to call for Canada to withdraw from NATO. So that's going to be before the Parliament. And like Ulla said, we just have to continue to stick together and do what we can to bring down this terrible military alliance.
Thank you so much, all of you. The formal part has now it's coming to an end right now, and we'll stop recording in about 2 minutes. But please stay on if you'd like an informal discussion after this. We have to thank UNAC for hosting this meeting. We have to thank Global Women United Against NATO for forming a group that is so strongly opposed to the horrors and bloodshed that we see in the world today. So we all have a lot of work to do, but please, everyone, go to our website, which is womenagainstnato.org. Have a look at our declaration. Please sign it. Please get onto our newsletter list, and please watch out for future events. We have some more webinars coming up over the next few months in the build-up towards NATO's next Jamboree, which will be in the Netherlands, in Holland, in, I think, May, but correct me if I'm wrong, a little bit earlier than usual this year. So that will be 2025. So watch this space. Please get onto our mailing list so that you can find out the next activities from Guan. And thank you all so much for taking part in this today. Thanks to our speakers and of course our audience, without whom it would all be pointless. Don't forget to share. When you get a copy of this through in sometime tomorrow, please share it in your networks, because these are very important discussions and we need to have more of them. So thank you to everyone. We'll stop the recording now.